Hello, and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica, and with me this week, I have Jay Dragon here to talk about Wanderhome. Jay, for those that don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Jay. I am a queer disabled tabletop game designer and publisher located in the Hudson Valley. I'm the editorial director of Possum Creek Games. I am most well known for my work on Wanderhome, and I generally make games that are frequently GM-less, often diceless, very much focused on community, magic, the magic of the mundane, the liminal spaces where queer people can find belonging, and home.
What a perfect game to be talking about and a perfect guest to have during Pride Month then. So if you have any questions, we are live recording right now, so please do ask any questions and we'll happily answer them. We'll get into talking about Wanderhome in just a bit, but before we get into that, I always ask the guests, Jay, could you tell us about your first experience with RPGs?
Yeah, so I've been LARPing live action roleplay since I was around 12 years old. And I started running LARPs when I was around like 13 or 14. I ran my first like large scale LARP with a budget. I got into tabletop games at the start of college. I played like one session of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and then I played Monster Hearts. And then it was all downhill from there, right? Once you find getting hooked. And I started publishing in 2018. My first big release was 2019, and now here I am.
Wow. So you said you did a LARP when you were 13 with a budget. What did that mean? People were like, hello, 13-year-old child, here's a load of money to run a LARP?
Yes, and thankfully most of the people LARPing were also kids and teenagers. So it was mainly just a bunch of adults basically a bunch of adults running games for kids and being like, we trust this one kid to come up with a good enough story for all the other kids, which is a very rare thing also to have happen in that context, because it's very much like, if you're running one LARP at a week of summer camp, it's like, well, this one kid we've got, I hope their idea is good. It turned out to be pretty good. People turned out to like it, so that's kind of where I've ended up.
That's awesome. So you've been creating games as almost a year after you started playing them, it sounds like.
Yeah. I think for me, playing games and making games are very similar to the same process, right? Like making like playing a game well enough that you trust everyone at the table, and like well enough you trust the game that you can kind of like warp it into your own thing, right? Like so many people do with Dungeons and Dragons. That's that's making a game. It's the same skill set, it's the same toolkit, just kind of applied in a different context.
Sure. And what when we say live action role play, I think what sort of LARP was it? Because I know there's lots of different types. You have some that are very combat type, and you have some that are completely have like no combat and are about interpersonal relationships. So what sort of kind of LARP was it that you were doing early back in the day?
It was definitely a mix. There were swords, but there were also feelings.
Swords and feelings, gosh.
Swords and feelings, and a very radical. This isn't about the LARPs. I don't want to delve too deeply into telling about my
That's fine. Yeah.
I can talk for hours about just this summer camp, but
the
long and short of it is the other kids really liked the swords, and many kids go for the swords, but I always went to like when my friend dies and I can cry over their body, or like I can like bring them to the god of reincarnation deep in the woods where the fireflies are, the more feelings hippie side of it. And that I think shows up in my work as well. I can't help it.
Well, no, that's great. I love that as well. No, because I'm into LARP as well. And when I say live action roleplay, people do think of like I don't do kind of combat LARP side of things, just because that's not what interests me. And I think that's what people are familiar with. So I do love to, because I think it's it's a slippery slope into role playing game from there.
Well, I think specifically starting with LARP and then going to tabletop is very backwards from where most people approach it. But
maybe
I do think LARP is a good inroad just because it's so tactile, and I think that like when you're thinking about games in a tactile way, and then you come to like a tabletop game and you're thinking about the tabletop game in a tactile way, I think it makes the game more interesting, right? Like one of my friends who's done a lot of LARP talks a lot about like how the dice in Dungeons and Dragons were partially chosen because they resemble crystals, like the kind of crystals of magic a wizard might wield. And so rolling the dice, right, rolling these weird polyhedrals becomes at least partially a LARP-like experience for a moment, right? There's kind of this moment when you become you're LARPing and you're rolling the dice and you feel like a wizard gambling with fate, and then you're back to being you at a table. And so like I think games get really interesting when you start looking at them that way. But I could, again, I could do this. I'm knowing that you're into LARP. Suddenly, I'm like, oh my god, okay. There's so many things I can find. So we'll talk about it another time. I'm sure.
Okay, we need to get another stream going on talking about LARPs. I'll happily talk to you about it then. But I thought it was interesting because I think having, like you said, having that approach will inform the way you design and expect to play role-playing games. And so now you've mentioned that just intrigued me with that. So with the games that you played, as in tabletop role-playing games, when did that transition start for you to be kind of working in the games industry? How did you end up at kind of Possum Creek Games? Like, you know, not just because I think a lot of people enjoy making games and it ends up being something that they kind of do with their friends at home and not something they do as a publisher like you have.
So it was partially a survival thing. I was a homeless college dropout, and I was like, how do I make money? I put PDFs up on online and people buy it.
Nice. Great. Yeah.
I also like, there was a game jam for making games built on the Belong Outside Belong system, which is a diceless system created by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum. And I was like, oh, I can do that. And the jam was done by the time I finished the game, but I put my game up online anyway, and people really liked it. And some people were like, you should publish that. And I was like, okay, I will. And then people really liked it. And then I suddenly had enough money that I could afford first month on an apartment. And then it all kind of, you know, went from there. And it was like, all right, well, I guess I'm doing this full time. I guess I'm starting a publishing company with my best friend. I guess I'm, you know, doing a $300,000 Kickstarter, right? Like those things kind of just start.
Yeah, like everyone does.
Yeah, it's a combination of luck and skill. And I think like which side of it that is, it depends on like which side of my bed I wake up on in the morning. You know, like some days I'll tell you like I got extraordinarily lucky, and then other days I'll tell you like I'm the best in the, you know.
It depends how bad the imposter syndrome is that
yes,
day, I guess.
exactly. How the arrogance versus the imposter syndrome, like how it balances out. But
yeah, we could say the arrogance, others would say the confidence, but you know, so
that's the imposter syndrome talking.
yeah, of course. Okay, so so the game we're here to talk about is, I'll get the book cover up, the pretty book cover. So this is the soft cover. So Wanderhome is what we're talking about here. So for those who aren't familiar with the game, could you give us like an elevator pitch, a short summary of what the game is?
Yeah, Wanderhome is a pastoral fantasy tabletop game about a group of traveling animal folk moving through this post-war rural world called the Haith. And it's a game kind of about these journeys, arriving in places, meeting people, and over the course of seasons, as you play, your characters grow with you until they're ready to move on journeys of their own. That's kind of the long, you know, the game is very much about kind of caring for something over a long period of time, growing and healing and traveling.
Amazing. And the cover art is so beautiful. You provided the version without it there, which is just gorgeous. Who did the artwork?
So we hired my business partner Ruby, or Grubby, did the art direction, and she brought in 16 different artists to do a ton of different art for the game. I think more than 100 different art assets. And the book is packed with art. It's very much, we really focused on having art that shows this world from a variety of different perspectives to kind of reinforce the fact that it's not just one viewpoint, but it's many viewpoints. And part of what that meant was like, you know, having like, you know, like for example, one artist we brought in is from Indonesia. And so like his art utilizes traditional Southeast Asian tapestry work as a way to indicate the passage of time. Because there's there's kind of techniques they utilize, and so there's one piece that looks kind of like a tapestry. Another artist has studied a lot of Northern Renaissance art and drew on the work of Peter Bruegel, who is a Northern Renaissance artist who kind of believed in democratizing the landscape and turning kind of, instead of a single focal character, creating this kind of vast field of vision. And so we really kind of were like, let's bring in as many different artists as we can. Let's bring in all these different perspectives. Let's see what happens visually. and the art kind of serves as a way of explaining the philosophy of the book and also kind of inducting you into the world of the book.
Yeah, we've got some other great artwork here, and as someone has said here, Wanderhome is 100% the prettiest book on my RPG shelf. So
Thank
it
you,
seems like all that effort of creating that variety of art and working with different artists has paid off. So yeah, it's an absolutely gorgeous book.
Even if you go back to the cover, which is by Sylvia Bai, one of my favorite things, you'll see this in basically every illustration in Wanderhome, which is the path that they're walking on. It doesn't just vanish off screen. It trails into the background, and it kind of reaches all the way to these foothills. And behind the foothills are mountains, and behind those mountains are more mountains. And in a game about traveling, it reinforces the fact, like the art visually reinforces this feeling that you are on one step of a journey, that there's like kind of more beyond the art that the artist didn't show you, right? Like there's more to the world that you could like travel to, and that like you've kind of like, the path kind of comes forward, and you can even see it in the foreground there. So the art kind of visually reinforces the themes of the game in a really important way, that part of learning the game and playing the game is like going back to the artwork and drawing from it.
Oh, great. So it's not just a pretty picture, it's also provides something for the game as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So with the game, obviously we've done like a brief little kind of summary of it. What inspired you to create this game?
So I started working on Wanderhome right at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd had like a few ideas kind of tossing around, and then they all crystallized right at the like kind of like late March, early April 2020, and I was having a very bad day, and as you do at the start of the pandemic, and I took some time and I sat by the water. There's this creek by my house, and I thought about, like, can you make a game that captures what it feels like to see, like, because like, I'm a very artsy person, so is my business partner. I'm very interested in kind of what is kind of the emotional and tactile experience that a game provides. And so I was very interested in like, what can a game capture the feeling of what it's like to be on the water looking out at the shore, and the way the world looks kind of when you're in this position of traveling. And I started writing, and then one thing kind of implied another thing, right? It was like I wrote a playbook, and then I was like, oh man, this class suggests that this other class should exist. I should write that as well. And then one by one, kind of everything, it felt like it was like demanding everything else, right? And so it was like in a cavalcade of a month and a half, I wrote the whole game. And then it spent
in a month and a half.
Yeah. I was really,
as someone who works in publishing, I'm like, what?
I know. And then it spent a year being edited, right? And the art, everything else about the game took a lot longer. But the game itself, play testing, of course, but the game in pretty much its finished state emerged by like, I think like early July of 2020.
Wow. Well, that's really impressive that the first manuscript was done in that amount of time. That's really impressive to me. So the play testing experience, like you say, obviously that the whole publishing side of it is like takes a lot longer. What was play testing like? Because obviously it was in the middle of the pandemic when perhaps not safe to meet up in person and play games. How was that?
Yeah. And it was the first game I really had to learn how to play test online. I was very used to play testing in person. And so a lot of the play testing process for Wanderhome became I would play with many groups of people. I kind of would do a thing where I had a Discord server, and I would go on and be like, at everyone, I'm playing a game in 1 hour. I need 4 people who can make it. And I would, there were enough people in the server, I'd get 4 people. Then I'd at everyone playing another game in 8 hours. I need 4 more people. Which I imagine was a little irritating, but it worked out. And then that helped a lot for like kind of just doing the run and stuff, like, how do these mechanics feel when people first pick them up? How do they first engage with it? Handing the game off to other people, seeing how they run it. And then I also had a longer term campaign that was with a group of friends who I would wake up at 6 a.m. to play with them. And that would just be kind of like the play testing, the longer term mechanics, and making sure that even if I didn't test every single long-term mechanic individually, like I didn't check like, oh, does every single box on this checklist work? But rather it was like, okay, does it feel like it works? Is the presence there? the emotion there, and kind of working a lot off of that and building off of that. And then, editing is a form of playtesting. And so the work of the editors kind of became part of that as well, as they beta read, and or rather, I guess playtesting is a form of editing, but that kind of came in and layered on and meant that there was a lot of time spent just being like, here's a list of options for your character. Does it do everything it needs to do? Can we fit even more into these options? How can we basically, the kind of the goal of Wanderhome was to do a lot mechanically without seeming like we're doing anything at all, right? To kind of hide everything behind like enough care and precision that it seems to someone who plays it that it's almost like there's no rules at all. But in fact, the system is very present but very quiet, and we kind of work a lot with the text to make sure that that kind of happened through the choices you make and the way you build your characters and the way you play the game.
Oh, awesome. So when we're looking at the game, if we dig into mechanically what it is a little bit, if we start with talking about the characters, so you said you're playing various different kind of animals and things. So what is character creation like? What goes into that?
So character creation starts where you pick a playbook, which is basically your basically like your character's class, right? It's kind of your job and role in your culture, your motivation for traveling. So those might include like the dancer, who is traveling as this traveling performer who's kind of going places to like, just kind of to enjoy the thrill of dancing. You can play as the moth tender, who has these basically, carrier pigeons. Kind of that situation, but with moths, and they're delivering letters to people. And you can go a little darker too. Like the veteran is a character who, in perhaps fought in this great historic war, and is now kind of trying to heal the damage they've caused, and they carry the sword that can never be unsheathed again. And so these different playbooks become like kind of your angle into the world. And you select one, you flesh them out. As you do so, you kind of figure out what lore perhaps that your playbook hints at that you want to build into. It's a very collaborative process, a lot of like back and forth, a lot of sharing things. You anchor your characters with each other, and then you have kind of your character, your avenue from moving through the world and seeing the world as it, emerging from the playbook. And there's 15 playbooks in the book in Wanderhome itself, and then there's another, I think I've seen like at least 50 online. There's so many playbooks that people have made.
Oh yeah.
So if you need one of those, there's plenty around.
Good to know. It sounds like, so how many options do you get in the base book there? Did you go through them all, or?
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of kind of making sure every single playbook is strong enough. They're like not strong mechanically in terms of power, but strong emotionally, and like, kind of making sure each character like kind of grips at you and has kind of an angle for you to feel pulled in and invited. I think like a good example of kind of the way Wanderhome will oftentimes approach kind of character creation is it will. So, for example, if I may, the playbook, the dancer, I think is a good example of this. One of the dancer's first questions is, choose two you are and two you wish you were better at being. And then you're given a list of options that include upbeat, honest, hopeful, generous, frantic, focused, charismatic. And then the last two are always related to gender in some fashion. So for the dancer, it's handsome and beautiful. And so you look at this list, and it's a list of 7 options, and you choose two you are and two you wish you were better at being. So maybe you are handsome and charismatic, but you wish you were better at being beautiful and generous. And so every single option is doing double duty here, right? Every single option is giving you 2 different ways to contextualize your character. And the text has a lot of that, right? Like, another question might be, choose 3 dances you will gladly dance and 1 you'll never dance again. And so the questions become, like it becomes, you look at each dance and it's like, well, why would I not dance this one? Why is this one the one that I don't dance? How does that change your relationship to it? And so it uses a lot of things like that to make it so each option becomes multifaceted, and the playbook is not kind of a linear, like, oh, like you go through this and you end up with the dancer and there's only going to be one you make. But rather, like every time you go through, your ability to kind of turn each option on its head means that you're kind of able to get in there and kind of reconfigure what these options mean, right? Like if I tell you that I will never dance the dance with all the winds in the sky to invite the weather to change, why won't I dance that? What does that say about my character that I'm scared to dance with the sky? Versus, if I tell you that I never dance the dance with time itself to teach an ancient story, maybe that makes more sense. Maybe that feels more resonant. So you can kind of find your character that way.
Yeah, I love that. I love asking questions and things like that to kind of, think about your character, because sometimes you come to the table and you're pretty open, and you need those little prompts can just make you think and give you inspiration.
Yeah.
I mean, this game is a lot about connection with others as well. And you mentioned that during character creation, you kind of set up what are our connections, what are our relationships. How does the game kind of prompt you through that section of it?
So there's kind of two main ways to do that, and one of them's a bit sneaky, and one of them's a bit more open. The more open way is that it does. I know, sneaky. This is what I meant by the many things that doing a lot of work to make it look like there's nothing at all. So
yeah,
the more open example is that you ask the players on your left and right, you ask them each a question, and those questions might be like, why do I call you my best friend? Or how do you feel about the fact that I've decided you're my new parent? Or why won't you ever dance with me is another one of the dancers. And so these questions become kind of these these focused ways of establishing connection. And the sneakier way is that every playbook is full of what I call in my notes and my project notes deep lore, which is basically that every single playbook has all these references to this mythology and folklore that the text never fully explains. And the trick of it is that different playbooks will reference the same lore, right? So, for example, maybe my character treasures, like maybe my character carries with them a pink orchid that's a symbol of their time in the rebellion, and another character has had stolen from them a pink orchid, the sign of their time in the rebellion. Or it's oftentimes more oblique than that. But there's references to the mysterious stranger with one white eye, and you spot these connections as you build your characters, and they tie you together on this different level because suddenly you have this shared folklore in common. You have this shared history to you, this mythos that kind of precedes you and surrounds you. And so suddenly, maybe you and I both chose one of the rebellion options coincidentally. But now we look at that and we say that out loud to each other, and we realize our characters have another level of connection that we didn't see before. And the question is, well, what was that like? Why are we both, how do we feel about the rebellion? And how does that anchor us together? In a way we couldn't have anticipated going in.
Yeah. I love the sound of character creation in this. It's very much set up, it feels like, for a long-term campaign where we're exploring these characters we're making. And when structuring a campaign, if you're used to playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, your campaign is going to kind of have a bit of a set structure which will build up to you fighting the big bad at the end. It's kind of the classic. I mean, there's different things you can do, but that's kind of the classic thing we're going to do. But obviously that's not kind of what this game is going to be. So what would a campaign kind of arc be in Wanderhome, for example?
So Wanderhome, to talk about it really quick, Wanderhome is GM agnostic, which means a game master like the DM in Dungeons and Dragons, you can have one for Wanderhome, although you don't have to. And the long-term play is designed to support either mode or the swapping from one mode to another, or like kind of developing a third mode if you have other ways of doing that, right? Like one of the examples in the book is like a group of people with a rotating GM is something that Wanderhome fully supports, just as fully as it supports kind of default GM models. So I want to say that first because it'll make the other stuff I say make sense.
No, definitely.
Where basically Wanderhome's approach is this kind of process of it has a really robust place creation system. So it uses these 36 seed prompts that are called natures, and you pick and each one's like a page, and you pick 3 of them, and they prompt together to form a place, and you can generate them randomly or you can pick. But like maybe we're arriving at a new location, and it is a forge, a farm, and a mountain, right? And so it's this it's this farm, this forge, and this mountain, and how do they connect together to create this place we're in? And then you additionally track the months and seasons. And the months and the seasons provide the longer term structure as you go from place to place, as you create these new places, and plot kind of emerges naturally as you encounter people in various places. You're kind of drawn towards certain things. You start moving in certain patterns. And every few months, during one of the seasonal holidays, that kind of is one of the holidays that marks the transition from, spring to summer, or from autumn to winter, those seasonal holidays, your character makes a choice that gives them kind of a new perspective, kind of allows you to do another twist on your character, another kind of perspective on what was there before. And that is kind of the structural arc of it. As you kind of move from place to place, the seasons change. The seasons impose new kind of rules onto the game over time. You make these choices, and eventually, when you run out of choices, the final choice is always that your character leaves. And so the structure of it is ultimately saying goodbye to your character, embracing a new character.
I feel so sad you saying that. Sorry.
But yeah, the text is very emotional about it too. And the ultimate kind of dream of a long-term game of Wanderhome is one where it's been many years and our characters have all grown and changed, and we've taken on new characters. Maybe some of those have left, and we've gone through these many different places. Maybe we've come back to places. The seasons have done all sorts of things. There's all these rules for how the seasons can behave. And the world has grown with us. And ultimately, I think, and this is true for a lot of my goals for my games, I want the players to feel like the game becomes their own, like the game fully becomes their own creation. That becomes something that I couldn't have even started to imagine. And that's kind of the long-term arc of Wanderhome, is this process of creating, I guess, like, it kind of feels like going for a walk around town, and going, like meeting people and like running into people you haven't seen for decades, right? Or, kind of taking a place and turning it into a home. Wanderhome is structurally designed that you take the game and you turn it into a home. I think is maybe the best way to put it.
Okay. Well, someone else has explained the final boss of Wanderhome is figuring out what your one-liner is before you leave for the last time. So that's the final boss?
the secret final boss. Oftentimes I think people want to know what it feels like to play Wanderhome, because it feels like the idea of like, oh, well, what do we do if there's no combat, if there's no we're not fighting monsters, what's the rhythm of play? And I think that the single best touchstone for what it emotionally feels like to go through a session of Wanderhome is Kiki's Delivery Service. If you've seen the movie, that is, I think, a really good reference point for what it's like to play Wanderhome, because Kiki's Delivery Service is the story about a girl arriving to this town where she doesn't know anyone. She starts doing errands and meeting people, and eventually she makes some friends at the town, and she finds a community there. And so Wanderhome is like, well, what if we do that over and over, right? Like, what if we arrive new places, meet people, help them with their issues, help kind of, get the town, help them out with, like help bring bread, oh, you need to deliver something, I can do that. Or, oh, there's, like maybe we can help, kind of like get you set up for the festival. And we talk about our feelings a bit, and we meet some people, we meet some interesting characters. My Wanderhome games always end up very sad when I play. I know other people's who end up very goofy and shenanigans filled.
That sounds just like what my games are like. Someone said, it's like, oh, Jess, you just want to sit in a room and cry for 3 hours when we're playing the game. And I'm like, well, sometimes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And basically Wanderhome really tries to kind of do all that while being low stakes, low investment, really like kind of making it as easy for people to sit down at the table as possible and be like, hey, if you want to sit here and not talk and just draw pictures of your characters all afternoon, or you want to play but you're nervous and you need someone else to help you, or whatever it might look like, Wanderhome's like, let's make that as easy as possible so that it's really like cutting away all the nonsense, cutting away all the other stuff that gets in the way of our ability to talk to each other and tell stories about the world we encounter.
Yeah, that sounds really great. So something that would be quite approachable for maybe a new player or something in that sense.
Absolutely. I actually know a number of people who have only played Dungeons and Dragons and Wanderhome. Like those have been the two games they've played, which is a very interesting combination because
That
I don't
is.
see that with my other games. But I see that with
Yeah.
Wanderhome, and I think it's because I think a lot of tabletop games, like I think Dungeons and Dragons included, kind of demand a certain degree of engagement, where
Mhm.
like and demand kind of like that you master the system a little bit before you're allowed to play. Like
Yeah.
before you can, like the fact that like many games have trap characters, right? Like building a Beastmaster Ranger in 5th edition, where it's like you've made a character that's just worse than everyone else's, and you couldn't have known that going in, and now you're being punished for making an interesting choice. And
Yeah.
that is a punishment that it punishes people who are lower engaged, right? It
Yeah.
punishes people who are less confident. It's not a
Mhm.
punishment for the people who feel really engaged and really excited. It's a punishment for the people who are cautious or nervous or don't know what they're doing. And
Yeah.
so Wanderhome is like none of that, none of that. No, like that is not how you approach. Like in the examples of play, one of the
Mhm.
players who's playing the game is nonverbal, and that was really an important part of being
Okay.
like, this is a game for everyone, even if you're not sure it's for you.
That is a really good example. When I hadn't even considered until you just said that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good thing to bring in. So it's inclusive for like a range of kind of different people as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
In kind of playtesting, are there any kind of stories or characters that have particularly stayed with you that you can share, or any favorite
Oh,
moments?
I think so. I think one of my favorites was this great game I played with my friend Brennan Lee Mulligan and my friend Jian Shim, who are both wonderful people. We played this game together where it's a very dark. It's probably the darkest Wanderhome gets. We played this game where we are exiles from this other land and we're traveling through this
Mhm.
river valley that is currently kind of like under lock by these series of like border patrols, and we've arrived at a university town to get the university town's help in like getting through the board, like basically finding rebels who we can like associate with to, like help us get through. And
Mhm.
spend most of the game, we find this professor, these two professors who work at the university who are radicals, and they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, we can help smuggle you through once the rains have passed, because it's spring, the rain, the monsoon is coming soon, the paths will all be closed, we can get you through in the summer. And we spend most of the game, in this game with these very high stakes, right? We're kind of like stressed out about the stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the game helping out with their potato farm and like, like babysitting their kids, like very
Yeah.
like, like, all right, we're in this stressful environment. We're in this high stakes kind of scary space. Let's
Mhm.
focus on the day to day. Let's focus on the mundane little bits and pieces. And it was a really beautiful, very sweet game. And also it had one of my favorite dynamics, which is I played
Mhm.
a very young child who was like had been through kind of some horrible stuff but didn't really understand it. They're just like, I'm a ragamuffin. And then this like Brennan was this like world scarred, heavy hearted veteran with this like, big sword and like all these scars. And immediately I'm just like, well, you're my dad and you're gonna take care of me. I've seen too much blood to love anyone. And it's like, no, 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 you'll love me.
Yeah, I love you enough for both of us. So
Exactly.
amazing. I love the little stories and things like that. So we've had someone make a comment here. They said that they found that deciding the location was more like the mechanics than the tokens and the playbook moves. So once they decided where they were, they ended up having just conversations and kind of telling stories. And I guess that's kind of that was what you were trying to achieve, isn't it? So
Yeah,
just trying to get
exactly.
people together and tell
Yeah.
conversations and
And
stories.
specifically, like there is a token mechanic throughout Wanderhome. It's kind of this very simple, like you get a token when you do this set of behaviors, and you can spend that token to do this other set of behaviors. And
Mm-hmm.
it's arbitrary. It's elusive. Its purpose is not to be prescriptive, but rather to give people a little bit more of a foothold if they need it. A lot of Wanderhome is kind of the subtle art of like when do like to have something for when people need it and to get out of the way when people don't. And that's kind of what a lot of Wanderhome is.
Yeah. Definitely. I think one of the things that jumped out to me, you mentioned a little bit before, was it can have a GM or not have a GM. So I guess in what you just said, that can either be there if it's helpful or not if it's not.
Mm-hmm.
How different is the game when there's a GM compared to when there's not, or is it the same, or yeah, how does that work?
It's it feels different. It's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the big critical difference is that having a guide, which is what Wanderhome calls its GM,
A guide, yeah.
having a guide leads to more structured play. So if you don't
Mm-hmm.
feel confident yourself GMing, having a guide is a good way to kind of feel like you can, okay, I can trust that someone else is kind of making sure that the structure of the
Mm-hmm.
world feels comfortable. And like
Yeah.
when teaching new people, I oftentimes will GM simply because when you're new, you're less confident. And so
Yeah.
having the GM is just a valuable tool to have, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the GM serves a very critical purpose for teaching and for, kind of community and kind of welcoming
Yeah.
new people in.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm playing with a group of people who are maybe all, like role-playing game pros, like they've all had, because like a game with no GM is secretly a game with all GMs, right? That, like every single player is kind of being a GM. And
The
so it's like
sneaky.
if sneaky once again,
Yeah.
but if everyone kind of has that energy of like, yeah, I'm ready to dig into this, it
Mm-hmm.
works really well. And it feels, I think much like very, kind of like when, like when everyone's kind of able to get in the same headspace, it feels like, like almost like jazz. Like it feels very like, it's like we're all riffing off of each other and we don't really
Yeah.
know where we're going, but
Mm-hmm.
we're following this river downstream. And so they're two different experiences and I enjoy them both. But it's important to test both as well to make sure they're both enjoyable and they both work. And like, again, there are other approaches. Like I was running Wanderhome at a con at one point, and a friend of mine showed up, and I was like, "Oh, thank God you're here! You can be my co-GM because I can't keep track of characters right now. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
describe the place, and you'll describe the characters." And Wanderhome's done that too, right? Like once again, Wanderhome is like that's great. So like, however you want to, like, really the key is
Mm-hmm.
like it will be a different experience every time, right? Like when someone else,
Yeah.
like you've got two GMs, it'll be a different experience than if there's one. If you've got all
Sure.
GMs, that's a different experience. But it's still, it's kind of the difference between like, I guess it's the difference between like going on a like going on a hike with someone who's able to show you around and be like, oh, that's the mountain where Rip Van Winkle did his thing, or like, oh, that's Sleepy Hollow, versus like just going on a walk yourself and stumbling on the mountain and being like, I wonder what this mountain is. Oh, I wonder who will. Oh my God, it's Rip Van Winkle.
That's a really good metaphor. And I think that is really great. It has that flexibility because I think, like you say, for maybe newer players or people that are just less confident, having a guide or the GM, the guide as it's referred to in this game, would be really useful and feel safer.
Mhm.
And some groups it would suit them, and other people, yeah, they just want to go and have a wander around. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really nice kind of mechanic to come in with that. Are there any other kind of features you've put in, any other sneaky rules that aren't really rules that go in and out that change the game a lot that we haven't
Yeah.
discussed?
So I think one important one that I like to talk about are the safety mechanics because
Yes.
it's important to me. I have a really complex view on safety mechanics, mainly because I think about things too much. If you haven't gathered,
And
and
not at all.
uh, and I think that safety is one of those things that feels very like frequently tacked on in tabletop, right? Where everyone understands it's important, but
Yeah.
there isn't like not that many designers are doing kind of like are thinking about what it means that it's important, right? Like what
Yeah.
is actually the purpose of safety of
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about safety in games? What are other things that matter besides safety that we should be
Yeah.
building toolkits for, right? Because safety is the first step, right? My friend Kazumi put it really well as safety is the first step towards belonging, towards community, towards, diversity, towards inclusion.
Yeah.
Like safety is the bare minimum. And
Yeah.
so if we treat safety as the end goal, but Wanderhome tries to treat safety as the starting point, which is if we can build a vocabulary for talking about comfort and talking about safety that is very kind of intuitive and built into the game, just as intuitive as any other mechanic, where can we go from there? So Wanderhome gives you a list of what it calls journeying tools, because it has kind of this extended metaphor about playing the game as a journey. And journeying tools are things like, what do you think? Or I don't know about that, or like, hold on, or like, no. Those are all journeying tools. And the idea of them is that you use them in play very naturally because they're natural language, and they're also frequently how you just play normally, right? Like I will often say, what do you think about that, when just playing a game? And the purpose is that you build in this level of communication very early on, and you integrate safety in many other ways through many different mechanics. And then by treating safety as the baseline, we can start talking about what else we can build on top of that, right? Like once we can be like, all right, we know every single part of this game is working towards making people understand that things will be okay and that they are welcome here. And once we've got that, and that they have the agency to speak up and articulate their needs and perspectives. And once we've got that, what happens next? What do we get to build on top of that? And that's what Wanderhome really tries to do with its safety mechanics.
I love that that's kind of built in the game, because a lot of safety mechanics that I had talked about in tabletop RPGs, which I think, especially in games like this, where they're quite emotional and it's exploring. Like if we're running in to kill a monster, there's maybe we need some safety mechanics, but I think there's more potential for harm sometimes if we're exploring quite deep emotional connections and things, because that can sometimes in the moment it'll awaken something in you that you didn't know was an issue. So I think that having the know and the hold on in the moment is great, because sometimes you can do a session 0 and sit down and talk about, okay, what do we want to include on here? What are we doing? But so do you have any tools like before the session starts on that? Because for me, I use things like lines and veils and stuff like that. But what do you recommend before starting?
So Wanderhome has Wanderhome's character creation process is kind of assumed to be as part of a group. And before you start making your playbook, you have a conversation of basically the book poses a series of questions to you that are designed to kind of modulate what your table needs. So one of the questions, for example, is like, do we want to go for a more like cheerful story or a more dark story? Do we want to go for a more slice of life story or a more mythological, fantastical story? Do we want to play with a GM or without a GM, right? And it phrases all these questions as kind of, how long do we want to play? Is this a one shot or is this a campaign? And like the answer to all of those might be one or the other, or I don't know, or something else. And it kind of puts all these questions on the same level as a way to kind of communally set the tone, both in terms of lines and veils, right? Because, if I establish, I want a gritty, dark game, it's like, all right, well, I got a follow-up question there. But, like, and kind of, establishing communal expectations and norms on both a logistical and an emotional level. And you do that even before you start picking your playbook. So you kind of get that establishing tone, and then you start building your playbooks. And then, and like as you're building your playbooks, you're introduced to the journeying tools. And then there are more questions that help self-modulate. And like the purpose basically is the idea that Wanderhome is not a game. Like Wanderhome is a game where, there are some things that might come up, but there are also other topics which are pretty likely to be avoided. And so the focus is less on let's make a list of everything that upsets us, because Wanderhome's not a game, where, for example, body horror is likely to show up. But instead, it's let's talk about what is important to us. What broad areas do we want to avoid? What areas do we want to focus on? And in general, kind of also, utilizing a lot of tools from childcare and like, pedagogy of like, how do you create a community discussion environment in like a classroom, or like, how do you create a community discussion environment? Like if you're an organizer, these kind of questions of like, how do you establish community norms? And like lines and veils is one tool for that, but by building it into the game allows the questions to be very tuned towards the game itself. And works with the journeying tools to kind of create this additional layer. And then there's a few other moments as well that I remember. Every once in a while I'll read through the book and I'll spot something and I'll be like, that's a safety tool. I forgot that was a safety tool. Forgot I did that. And things like that, where they're kind of tucked into the assumptions of the mechanics, where it's like the way, mechanics might be worded will be invitations rather than expectations.
Yeah.
Or like, and that is mechanically another safety tool, right? Even though it doesn't look like one, even though it's not a formal one, it's a way in which the text relates to the reader that creates kind of that. My friend Kazumi again, Kazumi is an educator, and they do this workshop with some of their students where the students will practice saying no to them. So they'll be in a classroom setting and they'll be practicing saying no. And Kazumi will be like, can you read out loud this passage for me? And the student will be like, no, I won't. And the Kazumi will be like, okay. And,
I
point to
love
the student, did you do the homework? The student's like, no, I didn't. And he's like, okay. And like, he does this kind of like practice of like, I want you to practice saying no to me and telling me that you're not going to do this, because that I think like safety to me, I think when I think about safety, it's not quite like, how do I prevent all bad things from ever happening? It's when a bad thing happens, how equipped am I to immediately respond to it and handle it in a way that's healthy?
Yeah.
And so by building that into the expectations of the game, where it's very much the game kind of plays that game with you, like, I want you to say no to me. I want you to feel like you can rule me or the other players, or you have that permission kind of built in from the beginning. That establishes safety from the get-go.
I think that's really true, because a lot of it is with like power dynamics, because like so many people don't feel that they can say no to things like that. And I see it in not in just games, but in like real life and stuff. Like, you ask someone for a favor and they're actually busy that day, but they're like, and they're trying to think of anything to say other than no. And it's a real skill.
It's really hard because we live in, I think, a lot of the Anglosphere society is this like intense politeness where we don't want to tell someone no, we don't want to refuse. And like I think even kind of the way in which we're taught improv, or the way in which we're taught play, is very much like, don't say no, always accept. And it's like, well, doesn't really equip you for when something happens that you don't want to have happen. So Wanderhome gets around that by giving you a little placard on your sheet that just says no, that you can, like, oh, what do I say? Oh, how do I respond to this? Oh, right, can I say no to this? Right? Like, it's right there next to everything else you can say.
I really love that. That's really great. So we've talked a lot about the game. Are there any questions I haven't asked you that you would like to give an answer for? So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to share and talk to us about?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, putting you on the spot.
I was gonna say, unfortunately, I don't think I can. I'm not particularly good at asking questions of myself.
That's okay. It was just if you're like, oh, I really want to mention this thing and I haven't had the chance to yet. But if nothing is coming to mind, that's good. That means I've asked you a lot of questions.
You've asked me a lot of really great questions.
Okay, great. So obviously everyone's listened to you talking and they've been like, wow, this is an excellent game. Where can I purchase this? Where can they purchase this game?
You can purchase this in a number of places. If you're in the US, definitely recommend PossumCreekGames.com. That's, we sell it directly. I know that there's also, they're also like on our website, you can find our list of retail partners. International shipping has gotten brutal around here. And I really recommend going to our page, checking out the retail section. And you can go in there and you can be like, oh, I'm in the EU. I'm in the UK, I'm in Australia, I'm in Canada. Can I find a distributor who maybe has better shipping rates? And I really recommend checking that out. We have a bunch of partners that we distribute through. We're really focused on kind of making sure our books get to as many people as possible, even if it's, across the pond or across the bigger pond.
Awesome. And also there's obviously pretty digital versions you can get. So that's a great way for wherever you are.
And everything. Yeah. Yep.
And you have a Patreon account as well?
Yes, and I do. Patreon.com/Possum Creek. We put up all sorts of stuff there. Ruby will sometimes write articles about like the art process. I do a lot of articles about game design. We release kind of like sneak previews of our upcoming stuff. I recently put up a few rules for magic in Wanderhome. If you want to be casting spells, I kind of invented some mechanics around that include like, they're very much like, okay, what, once you take violence off the table and like you focus on what, like what the magic actually is. What can that be like, right? Like, can you conjure up peaches that help people with their headaches, or like, can you always know where the nearest source of groundwater is, right? Like, what happens when you completely take the focus away from, being like, what is, magic is violence, but no, magic is, like, how can you use magic to, oh goodness, I don't know, tell whether or not a tree is sick. And so like, that's a cool thing you can find on there. I also, the Discord community is really great. I hang out there a lot. We do a lot of great like Q&As and chats about game design. There's a lot of great game designers on there. So do check out the Possum Creek Patreon. It means a lot to me if you support it. It's a really great way to kind of get the first glimpse of what we're up to, because we do a lot of stuff besides Wanderhome, and we have a lot of great stuff coming.
Yes, and I would be more than happy to have you back to talk about any of your other projects another time, because this has been a fantastic chat. And obviously we have to get our own other podcast set up where we talk about LARPs.
Oh my goodness, yes, please.
I'm not even joking. I will do that with you if you want. But yes, but yes, so please do check out the game. The best way to support independent tabletop creators is to buy their stuff. So have a look on the Patreon on the site to pick up any of that if you'd like to have your very own copy of this beautiful, beautiful game. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. So I'm going to say, Jay, thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on to talk about your game and sharing it with everybody.
Thank you so much, Jess, for having me.
No problem at all. Next week, we are back as we stream Not D&D every Monday. You can catch us live at 10 p.m. BST. And next week, we have Killer Ratings with Ken Lowry. So we're going for a different vibe change on there. So a bit of variety coming through. But yeah, so if you want to hear more about tabletop RPGs that are not Dungeons and Dragons, come back here and join us there. And you can always catch up on the podcast if you can't catch us live. But for now, I will say thank you very much again, Jay. Thank you for everyone that came along to watch us live, and that's all for this week. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.